welcome onto stage Mr. Rick Ackerman. So we have an end user panel now. We have three distinguished guests. Can you hear me? This microphone doesn't seem to be very loud now. I don't know. You can. Okay. Maybe I've just got a loud voice. So we have Rick with us in the room. And then we have, I was going to say we've got Judd and Ian, but so far we've just got Judd. So can we flip to Teams now on the other video feed? So here is Judd. Hi, let's give him a welcome, please. So, and then I'm going to play for time while I hope Ian is going to join any second. So you'll see him come up live, hopefully, in a minute. But in the meantime, I think it would be good for these three people to introduce themselves and their roles in their organizations and kind of what they're responsible for. So we'll start with the man in the room. Do you want to get that microphone right in front of you, Rick?
Hello, one thing first. Hi, Judd.
Actually, can we have you opened up my mic, the audio channel from Teams? Because I'm not sure we can actually hear Judd yet. Can you say something to us, Judd?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Okay, we can. That's a little low, and we're going to try and get that up in a minute. But in the meantime, before we come to you, Judd, Rick in the room.
Hi, obviously the vast majority of you know me. I'm Rick Ackerman. I'm the Director of RF and Transmissions Engineering for CBS. Deal with new technologies and better ways to move video around, such as wrist.
Ah, the plug. Very good, very good. Okay, Judd, over to you. Tell us also where you are, because thank you for joining us remotely. Tell us where you are as well as who you are and what you do.
Judd Pritchard, Manager of Fiber Infrastructure Group. I handle a lot of video encode, decode, compression for IPTV, live contribution, remote production. I'm out of the Techwood office right now. Rick probably recognizes the conference room
Yep.
that I'm in. Other than that, I'm responsible for a bit of everything, and then the IPTV head end is the icing on the cake for everything else. It's 2,500 plus global channels. That's kind of what I do.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I'm still just looking here to see if I've got any messages from Ian about why he's not joined us. Because he definitely was going to be online. No, we will carry on. We will carry on with you two gentlemen to start with. So whilst you're with us, Judd, whilst you're talking, so do you want to outline? So this is we're really looking at from the VSS perspective the uses of long-haul connectivity and what that's used for, the type of applications and the kind of criticality of different aspects or parameters of those connectivities for you in what you're doing. So I don't know if you can give us kind of a 2 or 3 minute view of the kind of connectivities you're using and what you're using them for, and how they need to behave to help you do your job. And then we'll come to some of the kind of commercial benefits of that a bit later on.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, as far as connectivity, globally we have three different types of WANs, right? So we have our dedicated multicast global WAN has a true red and blue that is new multicast IP over WAN topology. We have dedicated private 100 gig point-to-point topology that we use, and then we have, of course, internet delivery or dirty internet kind of thing that we use primarily for SRT. The multicast one we utilize to kind of share IPTV sources cross WAN. We use it to also run 2022/7 over for JPEG XS and J2K, and then we use the private line for that in the cleaner, more straightforward, less routers involved. Here's the cleanest way we can get it there for critical remote productions, just because it's faster, cleaner, easier to troubleshoot, I think. But so we have a mix of everything. And then as far as the dirty internet and SRT, we probably are one of the largest users of the SRT in the room. It's used for everywhere else that we need it.
And what kind of latency requirements do those different connectivities have, and how are they served with the technology you're using?
Well, as far as remote production and control rooms, right? I mean, XS is where we're headed, just because the latency is the best. Really, overall, we found we had a little less problems as far as audio video sync between cameras, between feeds. So for remote production, faster, better, cleaner. It's really tough for it to get more than half a millisecond out. Or I mean, not half, more like 32 milliseconds out, right? It's a little tougher for it to get out of sync more and require anything afterwards. We find we don't have to use frame syncs as often in that workflow. And I guess as far as dirty WAN or clean WAN for the cross, the only thing that we run into there is the adjustment for latency difference between the two, right? Because our protected WAN is protected on top of protection, and when we go from zero milliseconds between pass to 40 to 30 to 40, like we find it really important for everything to adjust. We tend to find the latency not to be as easy to keep synced, but it does. It's just, it creates some more challenges when it does it real time multiple times. So when we have a network flap on red and it goes red, blue, red, blue, red, blue, red, blue, it seems to respond okay, but there are times where that does wreak havoc, as everyone should expect whenever you lose the data stream and your latency changes by up to 50 milliseconds between the pass. So we're ironing that out a little bit cleaner and making sure we don't ping pong as much, and that we lock our vendors into red and blue, kind of staying fixed latency, fixed path, with protected as an option. It seems to work a little better than letting them bounce. So as we learn the lumps there, we're learning. Other than that, what was the rest of the question?
Thank you very much. Right, Rick is in the room. Do you want to talk to us about the different types of connectivity you're using, what they're used for, and the kind of benefits or challenges that you have with them?
Well, once again, much like Judd, much like Judd, a lot of the same things. Connectivity, we use everything ranging on the low end from cellular and bonded cellular for ENG use, which I talked about earlier in my presentation, all the way up through 3 gig uncompressed for transport, and obviously out of 1.5 gig uncompressed, JPEG, JPEG XS, MPEG 2 for HEVC. So if there is a flavor it's being used, I can actually I said low end bonded cellular. I can go lower than that and say iPhones and just people using their phones to call in for news. So you name a flavor somewhere within CBS, it's being used. Once again, we'll also have a bunch of circuits which will be going between Judd and myself next month for some little thing with a ball that gets thrown. But
cool. Thank you very much. So Judd, in terms of the economic benefits of the remote connectivities and the flexibility that gives you, I mean, one of the things, and this is, I know Ian would be able to talk to this, but he's not joined yet. In terms of these economics, is there anything you have been able to articulate or identify as part of the business proposition of these connectivities that have actually realized measurable benefits in the way you work? How do you actually do that, like, business benefit assessment?
Well, I mean, as a whole, it all comes down to numbers. I mean, the CNN Center, we're in presence of closing, so we're getting into consolidated control rooms, and Atlanta is primarily our hub for all North American sports and some of the UK. So as a whole, home roaming stuff to here has gotten a lot less expensive and a lot more affordable. I mean, 100 gig is not really difficult to get in a really economical model, right? So hanging 100 gig switches at the tail end at the venue is a thing. I mean, it's possible. So you're able to do pretty much whatever you want. And then with the global WAN built and the dedicated WANs between sites built, we're able to pick it up locally and home run cameras from a venue without having a production truck. Really, it's really just send us the lines and go. I mean, we're using far less trucks than we would before, which has its pluses and minuses. You're missing the on-site production, but you're missing the expense of 30 or so engineers running a truck. You're running multiple trucks online, and you're home running most of your production to a control room where people are there 24/7, 365 just about when it comes to news and sports and the mix of that. So you really gain a lot of economies of scale because you can bring more stuff in, higher quality, work on it faster, and deliver it pretty much all in the same area for pennies compared to what it used to be.
Yeah. Okay. And Rick, how about you on the commercials of the connectivity in terms of the investment versus the benefit?
In terms of what?
In terms of the benefit realized, so looking at the savings that are made to the way you work as a benefit of the connectivities that you're able to use.
Well, obviously, it gets the programming on the air so that it can generate revenue. So obviously, no programming is no money. The technologies are improving. The ability to move large amounts of data, even insane amounts of data, inexpensively, is coming down. Some of the technologies we're looking at for moving some signals around New York, ironically, talk about using many, many gigabits of data to move kilobits of data. But as weird as it sounds, it's cost effective. Without getting into the specifics. But one of the things that the ability is that the cost of moving gigabits, hundreds of gigabits from point A to point B in many cases, is getting very, very cost effective, I would say inexpensive. And so you can do a lot of things, whether it's at-home productions, whether it's moving cameras uncompressed, or other things. Because of the cost-effective connectivity that you couldn't even dream of just a couple years ago.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. One question for you guys. I don't know if you recall back, but this time at VidTrans last year, we had a panel for the first time on sustainability and looking at the kind of green credentials of the industry and the way that certainly in certain geographical locations there is more incentivization to actually look to greener solutions. Now I know in the European world, including UK, there is quite a lot of push to actually contractually from the end users, the service providers, to actually demonstrate sustainable credentials at that point in the supply chain. Are you, from your organizations, has that become a thing in the US yet in terms of looking for sustainability credentials and traceability within people that supply? I don't know if either of you want to talk to that.
No.
Okay. Very, very.
Okay. However, I will say, actually, no. It gets thrown out there, but it's not something that we really do dig into. However, we do like the ability to put equipment in a rack that doesn't melt the rack and not have huge amounts of air conditioning. So obviously, if your energy efficiency is really high, you can take one of your devices or a lot of cards or a lot of processing power and cram it in a very, very small space without having to have a lot of fans. So I would say that the engineers, not necessarily from a green perspective, but from an ease of use perspective, keeping power consumption down has a lot of benefits for design and plant engineering, besides just saving the planet. It makes life a lot easier.
Yeah. Judd, any comments?
Yeah, I can say as much as we'd like to say we do. We probably, that isn't our main deciding factor. I mean, we still have routers that draw a good amount of power, and then as things get more dense and higher powered, I think our power problems are growing rather than decreasing. Even though you can do more in the same box, we just find more boxes that we need to do stuff. So instead of having a 2,500 watt rack, we have 11 kilowatts in some of our racks that are just. We try to do better, but everything's getting more dense and using more power. So.
Yeah. One of the interesting drives that we've seen in the last 18 months in the European side has been the sheer cost of energy. So it's one thing having the motivation to actually be green from a purist point of view. There's another, the motivation, because contractually you're obliged by suppliers, and lots of, like the BBC and other key suppliers, have very aggressive, sustainability credentials. But the biggest drive, and I think one of the most effective ones in the last 18 months in Europe, has been the sheer rise in cost of energy. So actually people are looking to do things in a greener way, simply because they actually save significant money. So it's the bottom line of the business that's actually making some financial savings. So that's been an interesting motivation that really hadn't been so much of a driver until the last couple of years. That's very good. We've been messaging Ian, but haven't managed to get through to him yet to find out if he's able to join. So I'm still hoping we will get some input from him, because I know he's got some valuable stuff to tell us from his use case. But whilst we're doing that, does anyone have any in the audience here have any questions or observations on either the technology use cases for distributed production, or in the way we actually approach it? It'd be good to see if anyone's got any either observations or things that they would like to actually ask our two esteemed guests here that are actually presenting. We have one. Oh, the mic needs to be on.
Maybe there we go. Once again, Sasha from Nextologies. I keep getting the question about latency, right? That's always a topic. What are you guys seeing in your REMIs for your latency? That's number one. Number two, what about the in-house feeds? For a lot of stuff that we're doing with our partners, they're turning it back to their production facility, and then it goes back as a program feed. There is a significant delay from the in-house media. So the result has always been have a local person doing a simplified switching feed in venue for the house feed, and then the main program feed that's going out to the rest of the world is that latency. So what are you guys experiencing with XS and SRT/RIST?
Okay, I've actually been doing some study work on that, so I will make some comments in a minute. But first of all, let's go to Judd first. Do you have any comments, Judd?
That's kind of a tough one, because as we venture into it, we're in so much of a change thing. We haven't really sat down and gotten to measure the latency differences. We're mid-remote production, mid-REMI in the cloud implementation attempt, and we're mid-transition, all that things. So we haven't had a lot of runtime on the events in the new way that we're doing it. J2K definitely improved a lot of things, and XS seems to be going faster, but we're mid-implementation, so we don't really have the data to back it up yet. But it's promising.
Okay, any observations, Rick, before I jump in?
Latency, it depends on what you're doing. Some applications can tolerate a lot of latency without problems. I have been involved with several productions where they were concerned about latency and then put a 10-second standards and practices delay in. So that tended to blow that worry out of the water. But we've also had things where talent at different locations has had to interact, and it actually depends on the people. You put two people who just happen to interact in one way, and even if you had a half a second or a second of latency, it was almost like they didn't notice. Then you put different people in there where their interactions are more animated, where they're trying to cut each other off intentionally because it makes for good television. And the latency actually messed up their ability to do their shtick.
Right.
And we've had to go back and put in low latency paths just so that the interactive banter between two people can proceed as if they were next to each other. Because if you add just 1 second of latency, the whole bit's gone. It doesn't work. The ability to cut the other person off, to step on them while they're trying to talk and make jokes, doesn't work.
Yes, I was just more referring to, because he mentioned 100 gig connectivity is quite becoming easier to get into venues, and I'm curious how that's doing it. How NHL and NBA are putting that together, and I'm sort of just from a color production experience, what are people actually is it what's the response from the teams, right? I've seen producers with that 1 second, oh, I can't deal with this, it's impossible. And then there's other people who totally understand it. So it's an adoption thing, but I guess more data is what you guys still need to get together to get some info.
So just a few comments, and one of the other people that was hoping to be on the panel, but they're with a customer this evening UK time, is Andy Beale, who was head of technology for BT Sport for a good while, and I've had some good conversations with him in the last few months on some of the key things. First of all, to answer your ARQ/SRT/wrist question, we've actually got deployment cases of everything from 100 millisecond latencies up to, I think, 6 seconds. That's the spread. So obviously the 6 second isn't for live production. The 100 milliseconds is for those areas. One of the biggest bit of feedbacks from a user perspective of people that are doing REMIs, like live remote productions, is the consistency of the latency is vastly more important than the latency itself. So variable delay is the thing that actually is intolerable for operators. So operators can get used to maybe another 100 or 200 milliseconds of delay in a system as long as it's consistent. That seems to be one key message. The excess thing I think is interesting. As you're aware, the theoretical latency of an excess compress decompress is sub-millisecond. It's probably more like 200 or 300 microseconds. But actually, by the time you've put that in a real-world environment with IP packet jitter buffers, etc., you're talking probably about 5 milliseconds as the low point you can actually really realistically achieve. Plus, obviously, the route length latency of the 200 kilometers per millisecond of route delay that you're adding in there. But we've actually seen quite a few successful REMIs using HEVC and AVC as well as XS, and that's obviously you can get pretty low latency versions of those as well, but it hasn't needed to drill down to the 20, 30 milliseconds. 200 or 300 milliseconds has been acceptable as long as it's consistent. And if you think about the loop that's incurred there, the most of the things are tolerable within that. The only thing you can't really do is the audio loopback stuff. All of those audio processes that need to be at location have to be done locally. There is no getting away. Someone cannot cope with 200 milliseconds in their ears. In fact, probably 10, 15 milliseconds and you're gone in terms of the audio loopback. So that's probably the only other rule that's really come in. Anyway, Thomas Edwards has stepped up to the microphone, so I'm sure he's got a comment or a question, one or the other. You need to turn it. I think someone's turned the mic off again. There's a switch on the front. Pull it towards you.
There you go. Thomas Edwards, Amazon Web Services. Are you using NMOS in any of these workflows?
Oh, okay. Let's go remote to Judd first.
Yeah, actually, in our XS implementation, we're using NMOS rather successfully. It seems to be performing quite well. And then as far as our SRT workflows, I don't think any of our stuff we've implemented, because a lot of our SRT currently is fed the old way, I guess, would be the best way to say it. So, when it's fed via the HDSDI tried and true way, that's not a thing. But other than that.
Cool. Rick?
I'm going to punt a little bit on that. I assume we are, but I don't know exactly what all our control systems are.
Oh, we need to get some positive affirmation.
Yeah.
Next question, please.
Hey, Andy, how are you? Sean Sullivan of Stound Networks. Hey, Judd, how are things down there? It's good to see you.
Busy.
As well as Rick. So, our network is upgrading to 100 gig, but I do a lot of SRT workflows, distribution and contribution, and I find more efficiency if I provision, let's say, a 1 gig for an SRT flow over a 10 gig wavelength, just to minimize any kind of latency whatsoever. So I was wondering what kind of infrastructure that you like to have your services provisioned over, just for guidance for my company as we build out our network.
Realistically, it'd probably take a little bit more data. The SRT over our MPLS WAN works quite well. We're rolling to it on a lot of things where dirty internet was the way we went, and putting it over the UPS line, it actually stays nice and clean and works well and gets there fast without a lot of stuff or a lot of loss. But we're putting on a much bigger network. As far as the far ends, I mean, it is in some areas the gig is all you can get, so the gig is good enough. But the aggregate that the gig's going up to is 10 gig in most cases anyway. So I don't know if it's wrapped and rewrapped or if it's, you know, the aggregate to the venue that hadn't been upgraded to 100 is 10, and your gig's riding over that dedicated 10, so you're kind of a dedicated gig on 10 gig anyway. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that makes it more confusing or less. But.
No, that's got quite a bit of clarity to it. Andy?
One interesting observation on the ARQ question. I mean, for a start, you know, from a science perspective, ARQ technology, it does imply significant latency compared with what you could do without it. So, you know, if you've got the option of doing a protection using 2022-7, which to all intents and purposes is zero additional latency above the longest route that you're taking. You know, the ARQ technology is at least a couple of iterations around the round trip delay of the whole ecosystem. So there's significant added latency there. So one thing I've been quite surprised at, and I don't know whether either of you gentlemen are doing this already, is the actual use of ARQ on private wire infrastructure. So the biggest initial driver for ARQ technology has been over inherently unreliable networks, such as public internet connectivity, although public internet connectivity is getting better and better, so the reliability is more and more usable there without having to do too many tricks. But aside from using ARQ there, you know, has anyone got a comment, either or even in the room, about using ARQ technology, be that RIST or SRT, on private lines as well as with public internet?
So you're saying you don't want me to comment on the SRT part?
I'm saying you can comment on ARQ, Rick. Okay, Ciro. Ciro stepped up to a microphone.
Are you done, Sean? Or you want to talk some more?
He may want to talk some more, but why don't you respond?
Okay. All right. First of all, -7 ARQ are not mutually exclusive. You can do, and RISC does that today, you can do ARQ on -7. So you do -7, and what you don't get, if there's any packets that are dropped on both networks, you recover them through ARQ. But fundamentally, there is and I've done this in a talk before here in this room, there's a trade-off between reliability and latency. So it's the old thing, right? The more time you give me to do a job, the better job I can do. So the nice thing about ARQ is it's tunable. So have a very good network, one round trip should do you, right? If it's a really bad network, you do 10 round trips, you try that packet 10 times, you get it there, you really get it there, but it's going to cost you. So that's the nice thing about ARQ, it's tunable to the badness of your network. If you need really low latency, you better give me a very good network. And then at that point, I'll use FEC, use nothing, just send and go. Or use -7, that's going to get occasional packets, right? That's the point I made. And to your question, use of ARQ on private lines, yes. I've seen that. We have customers doing that. In fact, I have customers that have a corporate LAN private line, and that's one of the lags of the -7. And they should do ARQ on that, and then the internet is the second leg of the -7. That's it.
Okay, Adi stepped up to the microphone.
I want to second what Ciro said. I have experience with people using private lines, MPLS, SD-WAN for production, and they were riddled with problems that only ARQ could fix those, and we paid for latency. Another solution was to do bonding of those lines with internet links. So the private line was specifically meant for data carriage. It was holding the main body of the data, 99%, but the ARQ was carried over the internet or auxiliary lines just for that purpose. So for sake of security and other things, it supplemented that. So that, because many fear of that being exposed, so that is something that the RISC can do, some private protocols can do, and so on. So, yeah.
Thank you, Eddie. Thank you.
Yeah, I actually had a question for you guys. Brad Gilmer, Executive Director of the Video Services Forum, past life Head of Engineering and Operations at Techwood. Judd, I was just wondering, and you too, Rick, but given the tremendous bandwidths that you have available now for remote production, and also given both Paramount and WBD's kind of span of facilities across the globe, I can remember times when we were really out there pulling in every piece of equipment we could find wherever it was to do like Olympic production or things like that, tying in machines from CNN Center and DC and wherever. I'm just wondering, when you do remote productions that are really, really high value, is that all coming out of one facility production-wise? What are you guys doing for business continuation? And I guess the root of my question is, given the lower price and the tremendous connectivity now, have the kind of the options for business continuation with REMIs changed? How do you guys view that?
Well, on the CBS side, we've not done what I would call high-profile REMIs. I can't mention what they are, but on some streaming services, there have been some. But when we do stuff at a location with trucks, everything goes to New York and LA. I mean, so for the CBS television network, if the building were just to fall into the subway, or actually the Amtrak line, which is what it would fall into, LA would take over within a matter of seconds, and everything that's critical happens in both locations for high-profile productions.
Okay. And Judd, how about you guys? Same sort of thing? You've got multiple facilities up and running for something that's really important. How are you guys handling that?
Did you hear Judd's question, Brad?
I didn't hear Brad's question.
Oh, interesting.
So maybe Brad's radio mic is not in the clean feed.
Hello, can you hear me
check?
now?
I think it's on aux 3.
Yes, I can hear him now.
Okay, so for those of you in the room, just take a 2-minute break here. We're going to re-rack this to the top and run it again. Sorry about that, Judd. I didn't realize my handheld mic wasn't going out on the feed. So Brad Gilmer, Executive Director of the VSF and former Head of Engineering and Operations at Techwood in a past life, long time ago. But the discussion was about business continuation for remote production. And back in the day, connectivity was very, very expensive, and so first of all, remote production wasn't possible, but even if it had been possible, I think that we were pretty constrained on where we could go for our business continuation for something that was pretty important. And I was just curious how things had changed over time now, especially given WBD's footprint across the globe. Can you talk about business continuation for remote production at a high level, what your approach to that is, please?
Okay. As far as remote production, we're striving for kind of dual zone, dual global zone as well. We're working on the REMI in the cloud side of things. Short term, I mean, we have the capability to produce out of Atlanta, New York, DC, pretty much any remote feed that we want, especially once it's on the global WAN. We can take a show out of LA, send it to New York and Atlanta, produce it, send the ready-to-go feed to play out in the cloud and on presence, and do it all in matter of a few seconds or under a few seconds. So we have the capability to do so much more than we ever did, and not really impact the end user experience all that much. You wouldn't know if we're producing it out of the control room in New York or Atlanta unless you really knew us.
So is that something that shows up as a consideration in a discussion in the show meetings, or it's just understood that, you know, above a certain level or for a certain project or whatever, you're just going to always have that kind of backup going?
It is done by show, done by profitability of the show, and obviously the higher profitability of the show, like the event we're doing with Rick, you know, we have more options, right? We have three different North American uplinks in between, you know, Techwood, Cameron Road, and Sterling, Virginia, that are our own, that we uplink 19 transponders worth. Now, capable of producing it from pretty much any of our major news locations, which are also sports locations, and then we're able to, if we were to take the show feed straight from the truck, we could pretty much uplink it anywhere we wanted to. So it's a consideration. It's depends on the finances behind the event, and it's scalable by event.
I just had cold shivers run down my spine. So about 250 yards from where you're sitting, I had a sit-down meeting with somebody named Charlotte Leonard, who was the network head for TNT Latin America. And I had the wonderful opportunity to explain to her that the company didn't think that her network was important enough to afford the sort of backups that the other networks had. I think I still have scars on my back from that meeting. It was pretty uncomfortable, but yeah, I think a lot of times the revenue or the value of the production determines that kind of stuff. Yeah, but it's interesting to hear all the options that you have now. Thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Brad. We've got 5 more minutes. Is there any other questions or observations? Sean?
Yeah, Rick implied, and I'll talk about the two of you are involved in the elephant in the room coming up and the thing that has relationship to the month of March. And you share responsibilities. And some of those sites, I've worked with both your companies in previous lives, and that 64th team gets named like a week before, or some of the sites. Not, you know, the Sweet 16 or beyond. They are not necessarily in facilities that are prepared to do live broadcasts. So I was wondering, for major events like that where you don't have time to address infrastructure, are there kind of secret sauce or tricks of the trade that you guys share with each other? Because it's a shared responsibility.
Any comments?
I'm not asking to play poker and keep cards close to the
well,
vest.
actually, that's what venues like this are about, coming up with common ways, you know, for using technologies, advancing technologies, not just for one company, but for an industry. And that's one of the things why the Video Services Forum exists. You know, to go retro, you may remember, nobody remembers, but, you know, 70 years ago, you know, when CBS was just getting
Rick, you really aren't that old.
Yeah. CBS, had to build everything.
Yeah.
The lab, what's left of it, I run, but back in the old days, it had hundreds of engineers who had to build every single component because you couldn't go off to a vendor, to an Evertz or a Grass or any of the ones that no longer exist, and buy it. You had to build it. And that's what you had when you didn't cooperate, when you did not have third parties that built it. Now, we all do have to cooperate because we have to go to third parties to build the infrastructure that we need. So while there isn't, for various reasons, necessarily cooperation directly between the broadcasters, we all deal with the vendors, many of which are sitting in this room, saying what we need, and commonalities work their way into the products.
So do you share facilities or technologies at some of these REMIs, especially at the smaller colleges? I mean, years ago, I got asked to do Hofstra out on Long Island. They made it in at the last cut for the NCAAs, and quite honestly, nobody had infrastructure there, and they didn't have room for a truck. So do you guys share facilities in the kind of round-robin stuff you guys are doing?
With what level of events? I mean, you have stuff on the very extreme high end, like March Madness, and then you have stuff, I'm not going to mention what the low end is because I've made a couple jokes about the low end and gotten in trouble from people who didn't think that was low end.
That's kind of open-ended.
Yeah, but when you get down to some of that stuff, which airs on some of the streaming services and stuff, you can rely on a remote and a college to produce it. Some colleges don't have a great deal of equipment. Other colleges are loaded.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we'll come to Judd for a final comment, but I do notice he's got a sustainable light extinguisher that's been happening. So every 10 minutes, I've loved your dancing, Judd.
Mostly detection.
You've
been sitting still too long, Judd.
Over to you for a final comment, Judd.
Pretty much, yeah. And then I'd say as far as cooperation, we're both news organizations that are used to deploying resources everywhere as quickly as possible. So I think we're able, since our company in particular, our field shop and news and entertainment are kind of all merged together now. So I think any expertise that we had to do to it should have come up. It'd be a cooperative effort if needed. Right? I mean, as a whole, it's a partnership. We kind of share what we need to do and work out the responsibilities, but I don't get to sit in the room with that one. It's just here's where it's going to be, and let's go with that.
Yeah, I will just supplement that because the original question did say the word colleges, and Judd mentioned news. Obviously, on the news side, there's a lot of cooperation when you go into a location.
Great. Hey, our time is up. Thank you very much, Judd, for joining us remotely. Thank you, Rick, for being on the stage. And apologies we didn't manage to get Ian through on the connectivity. Maybe next year he can share some of his experience. That would be great. So can you join me in thanking Judd and Rick? Thank you.
That was Rick's hand in the frame there. All right. Thank you very much. Andy, thank you